Leaders of the world's wealthiest countries are arriving in Canada for the G7 summit. It's supposed, of course, to be a gathering of allies, but deep differences over trade mean this could be one of the most acrimonious G7s in years. Already, both France and Canada have strongly criticised the new US tariffs on steel and aluminium, with Justin Trudeau calling the American justification of national security laughable. Well, this has led to quite a few harsh words over Twitter. The latest from Donald Trump saying, "I'm looking forward to straightening out unfair trade deals with the G7 countries. If it doesn't happen, we come out even better." Well, as he left for the summit, President Trump further broke ranks with his traditional allies, saying that Russia, excluded from the G7 after annexing Crimea, should be readmitted to the G7.
Russia should be in this meeting. Why are we having a meeting without Russia being in the meeting? And I would recommend, and it's up to them, but Russia should be in the meeting. It should be a part of it. You know, whether you like it or not, and it may not be politically correct, but we have a world to run. And in the G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in, because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
Well, leaders are still arriving. Angela Merkel, the German leader, is currently arriving in Quebec, we're hearing, and she obviously has strong views about trade deals as well as about the Iran deal. And just a short time ago, the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, held a bilateral meeting with the British Prime Minister, Theresa May. They used this opportunity to emphasise their alliance on key issues.
It's always an incredible pleasure to see you. We are so closely aligned, not just historically, but also in very tangible ways as we look to bring forward a shared vision on the challenges the world is facing.
I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to have a bilateral with you to talk about the issues that matter particularly to the UK and Canada in our relationship, as you say, a long-standing historic relationship, but a relationship also being built on a very much a shared vision and shared values as to how we should address some of the key challenges in the world today.
Well, a shared vision, but as we're saying, not among all the seven. Let's cross to Quebec, where the summit's taking place. Gary O'Donoghue is keeping us up to date. Gary, I think battle lines are being drawn up, aren't they?
It's an amazing intervention by the President just as he was about to get on Marine One there to head out to Andrews to get on Air Force One to come up here, suggesting that Russia should be readmitted to the G7. You'll remember, of course, that Russia was expelled from the then G8 after its annexation of Ukraine back in 2014. I can't imagine any of these countries other than the USA here at this meeting that will support that proposition, or will regard it as anything other than a bit of a distraction, quite frankly, to some already pretty huge disagreements that they're going to try and hammer out here, notably those on trade, where there's a looming trade war really between the US and everyone else in the G6, and of course huge foreign policy differences. You mentioned Iran, but there's also the question of things like the Paris Climate Agreement, the moving of the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. There's a growing list, Philippa, a growing list of significant disagreements between some of the country's biggest industrial powers, who used to be some of the closest allies to one another.
I suppose there's a problem, Gary, with harsh words being exchanged, and that there's the potential for the trade war to really ratchet up. It could get worse, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think that's right, and I think you've seen evidence of that in the last few hours, that there's been no real attempt, but actually on either side, to cool things down. The President has been swinging out on the Twitter feed, as you'd expect, but also President Macron and the Prime Minister Trudeau, they've also not been reticent in saying what they think about the US actions here. So we're going to have a session on those trade barriers and those trade discussions later on this morning when Donald Trump arrives. That will be just after the EU countries get together and have a powwow about their approach. And I don't envisage really a meeting of minds on this. The two sides, or let's put it this way, the US versus the rest, are pretty entrenched as things stand, and this could end up being thrashed out for years to come in the World Trade Organization.
There's a sort of jockeying for power on the world stage here, Gary, and I'm thinking just as Angela Merkel's plane is touching down at the Air Force Base in Quebec, you know, she's somebody who's been a very powerful leader, but she's not really being listened to by Donald Trump, for example.
No, and her power has been diminished by those recent elections. In a sense, she's not the power broker she used to be because of that. And of course, Theresa May has her own problems politically at home, not just the weakened position she found herself in after that general election, but also the Brexit negotiations. And of course, the extra layer on top of that for the UK's point of view is that they were relying on a big trade deal with the US, a favourable trade deal with the US post-Brexit, as the thing that would really help the British economy once that happened. Now, if Donald Trump rhetoric is to be believed, he believes the only good trade deal is a trade deal in which the US effectively comes out way on top versus its adversaries and its other trading partners. So that's also going to be a concern for the British government. But all sorts of movements in the tectonic plates going on here. And as I come back to, I try to digest that news about Russia being potentially readmitted to the G8. I just can't imagine what the leaders here will be thinking of that as they hear that, as they gather.
Yeah, especially the leaders perhaps of Germany and France, given Europe's strong line on sanctions on Russia as well. Gary, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you for keeping us up to date. We're just watching as well the plane where Angela Merkel is about to disembark in Quebec. There's an official greeting, a formal greeting waiting for her. Those are the steps she'll come down. She may not feel quite as nervous about this meeting as Theresa May, who's obviously wrangling with Brexit problems and what her own foreign secretary has been saying back at home. Perhaps Angela Merkel feels a little more secure, but as Gary was just reminding us, after the latest elections in Germany, she too has reason to feel that there's more criticism of her leadership at home than there used to be, and she certainly knows that compared with Barack Obama in the White House, Donald Trump is a much trickier customer. Indeed, part of what Donald Trump is trying to get out of this G7 summit is the message he's sending to his own supporters back home, which is, look at me, I do things differently, I'm not afraid to upset the apple cart. Donald Trump, I'm sure, will give us more of that on Twitter and in person when he arrives in Quebec. Now, the other big international shifting of tectonic plates that we've been talking about. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is now expected to fly to Singapore on Sunday ahead of that historic summit with Mr. Trump on June the 12th. The US president has said he'd consider inviting Mr. Kim to the White House if the Singapore summit goes well. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has told reporters Mr. Trump's approaching this meeting in a hopeful mood, but also with his eyes wide open. Our reporter Robin Brandt is in Seoul.
The preparatory discussions continue ahead of the summit due on Tuesday. We know that senior officials from the United States and North Korea have been meeting not far from here on the border of the North and the South. That's happened on 6 occasions. They're trying to work out the finer details of the agenda, what may be the tangible gains at the end of this summit. That process is now shifting to Singapore. Now, on the issue at the very heart of this dispute, denuclearization, we've heard from America's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he has said he believes he's had an indication of a personal assurance from North Korea's leader that that country is now ready to denuclearize. The problem is, what does that mean, and does it mean the same thing to both sides? Well, to the United States it means complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, the dismantling of the devices, and for the world to see that process. To North Korea, Kim Jong-un has said he is willing to denuclearize, but only when everybody else, including the United States, is willing to do it as well. So it would seem there is still a vast, vast divide there. Now, President Trump has said if this meeting goes well, perhaps he's willing to invite North Korea's leader to the United States. That would be another hugely symbolic moment. But in the lead up to the summit and, of course, in the aftermath, many questions are what are going to be the tangible gains here? And what is the United States getting? What is North Korea getting if they are willing to put most significant issues on the table?
Well, just taking you back to Quebec, you see the German Chancellor there, Angela Merkel, has just landed as she arrives at the G7 summit. Just to remind you, it's being hosted by Canada, other members of the G7, the US, the UK, France, Germany and Italy, and it'll be the new Italian leader, Giuseppe Conte, who will be there, and Japan. And Prime Minister Abe, of course, went to the White House on his way to the G7 to raise his concerns about what's happening over North Korea. So an awful lot at stake. International trade, what's happening in North Korea, the Iran deal, climate change, a lot for these leaders to talk about. It's going to be a very busy summit. Another of our fast-developing stories here on Impact. The UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, has had to confirm today that she still has confidence in her Foreign Secretary after Boris Johnson was secretly recorded making some extraordinarily critical comments at a private dinner, suggesting that his own government's Brexit strategy lacks guts and that the talks, which should be leading to a smooth exit next March, are instead headed to meltdown.
And the risk is that we will end up in a sort of anti-room of the EU, not in orbit around the EU, in the customs union and to a large extent in the single market. So not really having full freedom on our trade policy, our tariff schedules, and not having freedom with our regulatory framework either. So just the lunar pull of the EU.
Well, in the last few minutes, we've been showing you that news conference from the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier. He diplomatically declined to talk about Boris Johnson's comments. He did say the British plans for Brexit and the customs relationship raise more questions than answers. He delivered a very critical assessment of the UK proposal for a temporary trade backstop after it leaves the EU. This is to avoid a hard Irish border. Theresa May has come up with this backstop proposal to fulfil her pledge to Europe that people and goods will continue to flow freely between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic in the south. The plan would see the UK continue to follow EU trade tariffs for a period if, as does seem possible, no permanent customs deal with the European Union can be agreed by the time Brexit takes effect in March. Theresa May says if her backstop is necessary, it will likely be only until the end of 2021 at the latest. But her reluctance to say that is a certain end date has caused a lot of political turmoil back here. And as I was saying, speaking just minutes ago, Michel Barnier has said this backstop can't be applied to all of the United Kingdom. It can be Northern Ireland alone. He really raised serious concerns about whether this is an effective measure.
The UK calls this arrangement temporary. How does that fit with the need to secure the absence of a hard border in all circumstances? Moreover, we had agreed with the UK on the principle that public authorities and businesses would need to adapt only once to the new situation created by Brexit. Only once. Does the temporary nature of the customs arrangements mean that several adaptations will now be needed?
Michel Barnier. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come, where are all the wealthy female sports stars? For the first time in 8 years, no women make it onto the Forbes list of the highest paid athletes. Hello again, I'm Philippa Thomas. You're watching Impact from the BBC, and I should tell you that in just a few minutes you'll be watching Aaron's business programme, and he will be talking live to the Canadian Finance Minister about the G7, so lots more to come. Now, with just days to go until the US-North Korea summit in Singapore, the world is fascinated by Kim Jong-un and the people he represents. For decades, North Korea has been one of the world's most secretive societies. Well, Travis Jepperson is one of the first Americans to study at a North Korean university, and he's now written a book about his time in North Korea, and it's called See You Again in Pyongyang. I'm very pleased to say that Travis joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us here on Impact, Travis. I know you've been to North Korea several times. What do you imagine it must be like inside that country as the world talks about this kind of rapprochement?
I imagine that North Koreans probably are approaching the upcoming summit with the same kind of cautious optimism that Kim Jong-un and the other North Korean officials are approaching it. You know, I was very surprised on one of my first visits to Pyongyang in 2012 as our tour group drove past a palatial structure in downtown Pyongyang. Our tour guide said to us, well, that's the Russian embassy, and we hope that one day there will also be a U.S. embassy here in downtown Pyongyang as well. So clearly the North Koreans for some time have been wanting a rapprochement of some sort with Washington, and I think it's very exciting that it's about to happen. Of course, I'm sure that they're very cautious in going forward because in the past, there was the 1994 agreed framework, for example, after which the North Koreans felt that the U.S. reneged on many of its commitments. There was the 2005 six-party talks, of course, where the North Koreans similarly felt that the U.S. was not sincere in its promises to North Korea. So for all of these reasons, I think that they're probably a little bit skeptical, but nonetheless optimistic.
Travis, our image is of North Korea, its people, cut off from the rest of the world. But I do know there's quite an appetite within North Korea for soap operas that get smuggled in and for information from the outside that may come in via cards or be smuggled across the border. Do you think they know more, the people of North Korea, than we imagine?
Yes, very much so. I was surprised at how worldly and savvy, you know, about the outside young North Koreans in particular are these days. And I think that's no doubt as a result of the fact that illegal foreign media is now widely consumed in the North. But also under Kim Jong-un's regime, there have been increasing opportunities, especially for people from the upper middle classes, who are frequently referred to as the donju, or money masters in North Korea.
Travis.
There have been increasing opportunities for them to travel abroad. So for those reasons, I think also they have a better idea of what the outside world is like.
Travis, I'm sorry I interrupted you. We don't have much time. I just wanted to make the point that, of course, so many North Koreans are still living in very poor conditions. There's a lot of persecution going on. And does it worry you at all that we're glossing over this because the world is so eager to see the nuclear program brought under control?
Absolutely not. I think engagement is essential for helping this society to transition to a more fair and equitable place. With socioeconomic engagement, I believe that will bring political liberalization from the ground up.
Travis Jepperson, been very good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Now, for the first time in 8 years, no women have made it onto the annual Forbes list of the world's highest-earning sports stars. The list is again dominated by male athletes from football, baseball, basketball and golf. Serena Williams made the list last year. She's now vanished. Her earning power fell sharply when she took time away from tennis to have her baby. The top 5 athletes on the list are Brazilian football star Neymar, mixed martial arts fighter Conor McGregor, the Real Madrid striker Cristiano Ronaldo, and Ronaldo's arch-rival Messi, who plays for Barcelona and Argentina. And topping the list is American boxer Floyd Mayweather. Perhaps appropriate, considering his nickname is Money Mayweather. Well, let's get the views of a former British track and field star, Kelly Southerton. In total, Kelly has won 3 Olympic medals, including bronze medals for the heptathlon at the Athens Olympics and 4 years later at the Beijing Olympics. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us here on Impact Today. Were you shocked by this or unsurprised?
No, unsurprised. Obviously, I would have liked to have seen Serena, but for obvious reasons and motherhood, she's not on that list. But no, it's not a surprise. It's where it's been for a long time. You just have to look at the TV and the media coverage out there, and it's all male-dominated sports. Not to say that women's sport isn't coming to the forefront. It is. It's just taking its time.
And is it because of television in a way? Is it because of the money to be made from selling TV rights in football or basketball or baseball?
Yeah, it's very, very media driven, and we have seen some of women's sports come on on British TV, on the BBC and Sky, like women's football and netball. However, you know, when the Premier League rights in UK and Sky and BT big sums of money are going to buy those rights, then they have no other money to spend on any other sport. But you know, maybe on the flip side, soon, you know, the Premier League will price themselves out. The players and agents will ask for too much money, so they'll go for the cheaper option. Could be women's sport, and that could be the only way of actually getting women's sport driven by the media. But it is very media driven. And until we see more of that in the papers, in magazines and on the TV, then that will help grow the fan base, which then will hopefully grow the revenue for women's sport, and then eventually may see some women on this list.
Yeah, Kelly, the situation that you've had, I mean, you've won 3 Olympic medals, you've done astoundingly well, but have you found it hard to make real money in athletics?
Yeah, I mean, truly, you have to really be an Olympic champion. You have to be a legend. The likes of like Jessica Ennis and Mo Farah, Usain Bolt. You have to be in that category of winning constantly and have longevity, and that's where you'll make some money. But even if you're a multi-million pound athlete in athletics, you're still not really making that list. So it is the football, some of the American sports, it is the tennis. It's those who get a lot more coverage in sports, a lot more commercial sponsorships are in those sports too. So, but I'd like to say that, I mean, I imagine most sports people don't do it for the money, they do it for the performance and to win.
Kelly, in just a few seconds, what would you say to young girls starting off in sports today?
I just say do what you want to do, as in go to perform to win medals. Medals stay for you for life. Yes, money comes and it goes, but what would be really good is you just go out there, work really hard, and if you want a gold medal, go and win that gold medal, and whatever it brings for you, it's just a bonus.
Kelly Southerton, it's been very good to have you with us here on BBC World News. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And just time to remind you of our top story, which is that leaders of the G7 nations are gathering in Canada for their annual summit. After the break, in Talking Business, Aaron Heselhurst will be speaking live to the Canadian Finance Minister Bill Morneau. And we've heard quite a lot already from leaders at the G7, including Donald Trump on his way there, saying, hey, it should be the G8 again. Russia should be involved once more. He's in combative mood as he flies north from Washington to Quebec. So we're going to be very busy in Talking Business and again in the final edition of Impact Today. So do stay with us. And just to remind you, if you can't be with us, there's a lot more on the BBC Online on all our fast developing stories today.